Greetings, folks. This is going to be our final show of our first season of Root Words. We're going to take a few weeks off to work in the garden and to work on some stories we're really excited about. We're going to be bringing more people and perspectives to the table, as it were. Keep an eye on our feed, and we'll be back soon with some thought-provoking conversations that we think will shift the way you think about food and community. We're happy to end our first season with an episode that we feel drills down to the bedrock of the local food conversation. And a warning, this episode acknowledges the concepts of forced removal and genocide of Indigenous people. Welcome to Root Words, a podcast that explores agriculture and cooking's role in connecting us to our landscape and our communities. I'm Stephen Abatiell. Root Words is a collaboration between Vermont Farmers Food Center, Shrewsbury Agricultural Education and Arts Foundation, Shrewsbury Historical Society, WEXP, and many other community members. The project began in 2017 and was made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as from this community. Throughout this podcast, you're going to be hearing stories from people around the Rutland County region in the heart of Vermont, a region rich in agriculture, family farms, a region that's a pastoral working landscape. These stories are going to be each little windows into what a regional food system really looks like on the community level. We're excited to introduce you to some passionate folks working with the land and with food and bringing communities together. So please pull up a chair and enjoy. Vermont officially recognizes 4 Abenaki tribes today: the Nulhegan band of the Coosuk-Abenaki, the Elnu Abenaki tribe, the Abenaki Nation at Missisquoi, and the Koasek traditional band of the Koas-Abenaki Nation. Up until industrialization and throughout much of the world today, a community's access to food is tightly woven in with that community's access to land. On this episode of Root Words, we'll talk with Chef Jessee Lawyer.
My name is Jessee Lawyer. I'm an enrolled citizen with the Abenaki Nation at Missisquoi. I am the executive chef at Sweetwater's American Bistro in Burlington, Vermont on Church Street. And yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Father hunter, food sovereignty activist.
Professor Fred Wiseman.
My name is Fred Wiseman. By trade and training, I'm an ethnobotanist and geologist. I took my degree at the University of Arizona. A few years ago, I moved up to Vermont and decided to shift gears and begin working with the Abenaki community up here, since my father's mother is of Abenaki descent.
And Chief Don Stevens.
Yeah, I'm Don Stevens. I'm chief of the Nulhegan band of the Coosuk-Abenaki Nation. I was elected in 2010 by the families or the family bands that make up the tribal council to carry out specific duties of being an interface with local, state, and federal government, and to represent our people as that gateway between the public and our tribe.
And we'll hear a little about the Abenaki community's connection to this land, game animals, and traditional foodways, and we'll hear how these living traditions have continued to evolve and grow through contemporary times. We'll begin in the kitchen with Chef Jessee Lawyer.
Almost every food culture in the world has been or would not be what it is today without indigenous foods to the Americas. So just, you think Italian cuisine, you think tomatoes. That was nowhere else in the world before in 1492 than South America. Corn, beans, and squash, the only beans that were out there were soybeans and garbanzo beans. So any country that uses dry beans, as part of their cuisine are using an indigenous cultivar. In Asian cuisine, you think spicy food, Thai spicy food, Korean spicy food. Those chili peppers, those hot peppers, they were found nowhere else in the world besides South America prior to colonization. So I think to non-indigenous folks who are looking into this is, we had a vibrant food culture all across the Americas prior to 1492, and we still have a vibrant food culture today. And I just, those things that people think and take for granted, corn, I don't know if it's I think it's the largest or second largest grain grown, right? These things that are part of everyone's diets today, those are our ancestors' intellectual property. They not only intellectual property, those are our relatives. We've tended and grown and bred those over generations, and it's time that we bring those back into our communities and continue that relationship with our food. I love duck. That's one of my favorite pieces of meat. Corn. I love corn in all its forms: hominy, grits, masa, polenta, cornbread. With corn, I like to do a lot of boiled cornbread. So it's basically, you're just taking corn, water. I do add maple into it, make a dough, and then boil it until it's soft. And then, you can't from there sear it or don't. It's just, you just get that beautiful flavor of the nixtamalized corn, keeping it very simple, true to the flavors. Squash is a big one in my repertoire arsenal of cultivars. Love baked beans, slow cooked maple baked beans. Moose is a big one. I've been fortunate to connect with a friend who he's Penobscot. He's a sustenance hunter, and I went last year to moose camp with him and tagged along on his moose hunt, and he got a moose and he shared with me some of the meat, so that's been in my freezer. I love slow braises. I love stews. If I'm going to sear a piece of meat or a back strap, it's just going to be rare with salt. Wild rice is amazing. It just kind of elevates any dish, and then you can also do so much with it. You can just cook it and serve it as is. You can overcook it, make cakes, and get them crispy on the outside. I tend to grind it into flour a lot and coat fish and fry it like that. So those are just some of my favorites. When I'm at home, I try to keep things just really simple and clean. If I do something at work, I do elevate it a little bit, but just really focusing on the flavors of the product themselves. So sunchokes, those are probably my favorite tuber in the world. I'll take those over potatoes any day. I love East Montpelier squash. That's one of our varieties that, in my mind, we don't even need to add anything to it. Just roast it, give it a quick mash, and serve it as is. I was given by Kerry Wood this year quite a few ears of callus flint corn. So I ground that into cornmeal and have been using that over the winter, which was delicious. But sunflowers were a big cultivar too, sunflower seeds. Jacob's cattle beans are very easily obtained in large quantities. There's a lot of growers that have them, so I do use those a lot. I did get a black bean this year that came from Quebec. That's Wabanaki variety from the Seeds of Renewal project. So I've been experimenting with those. Black bean chips, black bean burgers. And I guess the genetics of those two are completely different from the South American varieties of black beans, which is pretty interesting. And I've been developing recipes for the Abenaki people using our cultivars and wild game and a number of various forage items to bring delicious and healthy meals to the community using our traditional landscape. So I just started building and, recording recipes, and I've sent a few recipes over to Chief Don to pass out with the cultivars that are grown from the Abenaki Lane Link project, and just continuing to build and develop those recipes and make them accessible to Abenaki folks and put delicious food on the table. So for me, it's very important because I think at the center of a community is food. That really brings a community together. It's a community process of, whether it's hunting or growing, it's a community effort. And, traditionally it was always shared. And I want to bring that back to our community, that kind of like shared communal food experience, because I think all of us can relate. Some of our fondest memories, growing up and as adults, are centered around food. I kind of just fell into cooking. I worked at a pizza shop in Plattsburgh, New York. I approached the owner about cooking, and I started cooking there. I was there for about 2.5 years cooking, and then I came to Sweetwater's as a fry cook and worked my way up to executive chef. And then, I worked closely with Fred Wiseman for a number of years, and he was my mentor. And with all the work he was doing with our seeds and seeds of renewal and reclamation of our relatives, like he kept kind of nudging me to start working with our foodways. And, I'm like, yeah, I will. And then I don't know what happened. One day it just clicked, and I'm like, this is important work. And I'm in a perfect position to start that work. And it's kind of just grown significantly over the last 3 years.
Well, Jesse's an interesting guy. He's trying to take, indigenous crops and cuisine and kind of kick it up, as Emerald would say, to the next level. He's working on very complex, savory mixtures of spices, and different types of condiments and things like that. And so we're always discussing, well, how far can we go? Can we include, tomatoes? Or husked tomatoes and things like that. And so that's really interesting. What is indigenous cuisine? How far, can we just deal with Abenaki? Or can we spread it out a little bit?
Professor Fred Wiseman started the Seeds of Renewal project in 2012 as an outgrowth of the research conducted for the 4 Abenaki tribes' Vermont state recognition petitions. The project has grown past seed reclamation into the more social aspects around food. Professor Wiseman helped found the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center at Burlington's Intervale and was voted in as coordinator in June of 2020.
People need to have control over their own food systems. And this is a movement that started in the 1980s, basically in Africa. There was a declaration of Nyalini, basically says that that people, not just indigenous people, have a full right to have their own food system and not be dictated by colonial or post-colonial powers like the United States. So things such as the Green Revolution and trying to have genetically modified stuff and put it, and the USDA and USAID, they kind of push these genetically engineered or modern varieties on people. And for a long time, it worked well, but a lot of these crops wear out the soil very quickly because they're bred to be able to be fertilized, and so by more chemical rather than biocultural means. And so there was a massive problem in the 1970s and 80s as the Green Revolution really didn't pan out the way that it did. And so one of the reactions to that was try to go back to your original agricultural system. Now, the big problem in Africa and much of the world is they're tied into international marketing. And so people now in Africa, they'll raise crops for sale to other people and then import crops from someplace else. So the whole sovereignty movement is to try to break that interdependency with large scale multinational corporations. And I think it's in many places in the world, it's just a dream. But there are some places that are approaching it. Some of the southwestern pueblos, for example, are probably about 60% now indigenous, and only about 30% of the stuff has to be imported. So it's possible to approach that. So what I'm trying to do for seed sovereignty or food sovereignty is make people aware of their own heritage and be able to eat their own heritage and history, if not all the time, but at least at special ceremonial times like the harvest or green corn ceremony and stuff like that, so they can connect back to who they always been, to understand, who they are. I think it's really important theoretically, to know what our history is, but for people to eat that, it gets them in their heart a little bit, and it engenders a different kind of emotion of knowing who you are. It's almost, one person said, it's almost like taking communion in the Catholic Church. We're all eating this together. And so that's why it's really important for us to have large dinners like the Harvest Supper. And we invite, all the different tribes together, and everybody brings a dish. Somebody will bring, a bear that their uncle shot, or, deer, ground venison, and then we cook everything up over a big fire. And we have people that bring their maple syrup that they, and so, it's a communion kind of a situation. And I know that Koas does that. I know that Nulhegan does, and of course we at the Heritage Center down in Burlington, we do it too. So that's that's an important emotional and even some people would say spiritual connection to understanding who we are. Our next ceremony coming up that the public is invited to is a green corn ceremony, which is set by the ripening of green corn to the corn on the cob stage. And then we have the Harvest Supper. These are not events that are for the public. Okay, we do these for our ancestors and ourselves, but the public is invited to watch, and certain things, we have dances. Some dances are intertribal that we invite the public in, and we understand that that's more realistic and more enlightening for the public than a powwow, which of course is colonized performance for a paying audience. We want to invite the Vermont public in to see what we do.
Before colonization, the Abenaki tribes were stewards to all of the 6 million acres of what was to become known as Vermont. Today, just 2 pieces of forest land are held and stewarded by 2 of the Vermont Abenaki tribes. Forced removal disconnected communities from the land they inhabited, and Vermont's eugenics programs caused many more to hide their cultural practices and their identities.
Well, I mean, historically, and this is all across the country, tribes being displaced from their homelands, going onto reservations, or, communities being separated into individual family units, and, just the land getting squared off and sold, where there was so much more space to roam, to hunt, to center ourselves, to cultivate the land. That's where I guess a lot of the food problems came from originally, and then now it's just having access to those lands to be able to grow or hunt. And too, I mean, with processed foods and foods becoming like easier just to grab and eat, full of basically garbage, and then our corned beans and squash, they do take a little love to cook. It's just, it's a labor of love, and sometimes people opt for just that quick candy bar, that quick bag of chips at the store, instead of, maybe making something to take along with them, or, cooking a meal from scratch at home versus using box products. So it's kind of like changing that idea in your head to, put something that's better in your body for you than something that's quick and easy. And here, I mean, I had a conversation with Chief Don one time, and with our problem is, we don't have lands and we don't have money. So it's not really food sovereignty. It's food security. So, we have people that help us get the food we need to get to tribal citizens to be able to feed them, where eventually I want to see us get to a point where we're doing that ourselves. So we're taking care of ourselves and our people with food. It would most likely start with, lands that we can operate ourselves and tend to ourselves, grow ourselves, harvest ourselves, hunt on ourselves, and do it ourselves. And I guess instead of relying on other people to help us, which, like, I'm not trying to negate the fact that, it's great that people help us. It is wonderful. And I'm so glad that there's so many farmers and people that are willing to help out. I just personally would like to see ourselves be able to do that. So us taking care of ourselves as it has been in the past.
Chief Don Stevens of the Nulhegan Band of Abenaki believes that food sovereignty for his tribe will come when they are able to provide for their own sustenance.
Currently, we are not at the food sovereignty level yet. I call it food security, because since we don't have our own land except for 65 acres of forest land, we don't have the acreage to grow crops on our own land. So I call it food security because we rely on others who hold the deeds to those lands to help us grow our crops, raise our bison and beef, and to provide us access to collect natural foods and medicines. So that's why it's more referred to, in my view, as food security more than sovereignty. We hope to work towards sovereignty.
And so what are some of the ways that you're working towards food sovereignty?
Well, I took a three-pronged approach along with our tribe. First, to give us access to the lands that our ancestors once had, to be able to collect natural foods, medicines, and artistry material. So if you went to our website, AbenakiTribe.org, and looked under partnerships, you would see the agreements that I have negotiated with the state of Vermont, Fish and Wildlife Department, the Department of State Parks and Recs, Agency of Natural Resources, and a host of other organizations like the Vermont Land Trust, Green Mountain National Forest, and so on. So these agreements are all different based on the comfort level of the person, and allows us to access those lands to do the traditional gathering of our foods. That's the first prong approach. The second prong approach was working with people like the colleges to be a seed bank, to grow our crops and distribute the produce that was achieved from those seed bank growing opportunities, and provide that food to our people while educating the students. Along with that garden project was also working with Rooted in Vermont and NOPA, who we started the Abenaki Land Link project with, that has started out with about 15 growers that helped us grow food and save the seeds. But also we have expanded to about 40 people this year to grow those. And last year, I think we produced around 700 pounds of squash, a few hundred pounds of beans, and some few hundred pounds of cornmeal. And I expect that number to rise drastically with the increase of helper with other people helping to grow. The third and last approach was to raise bison and beef. We have a bison herd in Shoreham, Vermont. We have about 24 bison, and we call them periodically to provide our the meat to our citizens, along with beef as needed. So people have the beef, they have the garden products, and they have the natural access to food. So there's like a trifecta approach. It's just a different, you have to look at not just what you're doing for yourself, but how does that impact the world around you? And I think that's the biggest thing, is understanding your connection to the food source, certain techniques that you can use for gardening. I mean, you might want to use fish instead of fertilizer, but also, that world view of how things are interconnected and a way of being in this world. That's a shared responsibility. So I think that's really what I want people to really get to know and understand. My recommendation is just reconnect to your food source, your spiritual source, and the environment around you and the land that you walk on. And find ways to make it better for not only yourself, but the people the animals and the plants that live around you, and what do they need? I just challenge people to do that, and look at things in a different way.
Chief Don Stevens is looking at the challenge of Abenaki food sovereignty in new and different ways. His three-pronged approach has borne a lot of fruit already, and we're going to dig into some of that contemporary Abenaki foodways work, including the Abenaki Landlink Project and the Seeds of Renewal Project, when we come back in Season 2 of Root Words. We'll also meet more chefs and growers and passionate folks expanding food access in more communities. Until then, maybe you can drop by Sweetwater's and treat yourself to whatever elevated cultivar Jessee may have on the menu tonight.
Like, if I can take anything, or if I can give anything from what I'm doing, is I want to inspire, home cooks within the community to want to cook this kind of food for them and their families. I mean, that's really, I ask my question a lot, like with my Instagram, is like, what am I trying to obtain? Why am I doing this? And the only thing I can keep coming back to is to inspire our tribal citizens to cook. I feel connected to my ancestors, and that we're still cooking and eating and sustaining ourselves with the same food that our ancestors did. And my children eat it, and I hope that they are watching what I'm doing and, continue to eat that and teach that to their children, and just, keep it alive and take it back.
This episode of Root Words was produced by Stephen Abatiell. Special thanks to Jessee Lawyer, Professor Fred Wiseman, and Chief Don Stevens. You can follow Jessee Lawyer on Instagram at the Donland Kitchen for some culinary inspiration. Check out the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center's website, alnobawi.org, spelled ALNOBAIWI.org, for information about Professor Wiseman's Seeds of Renewal project, as well as events at Burlington's Intervale Center that are open to the public. You can learn more about Chief Don Stevens and the Nulhegan Band of the Abenaki's work for food sovereignty online at abenakitribe.org. Our musical themes are by the Salt Ash Serenaders. We are a project of the Vermont Farmers Food Center and SAGE. Thank you all for listening and for being a part of our local food system. This podcast has been made possible by generous support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We'll catch you next time on Root Words.
I will add one thing. I don't know if I said this yet, but, with, especially in Vermont, and the push for local foods and eating local and buying local, you can't have that conversation without the Indigenous perspective, because there is nothing more local in any part of, the Americas than what the Indigenous people were eating, growing. You just can't get any more local than that. So if you are talking about local food systems, you start at square one. You start at the Indigenous populations of that area. And here in Vermont just happens to be the Abenaki.